Welcome to Sustainability Now, solutions to shape a world that works. Designed for everyone interested in responsible stewardship of the planet, covering food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Mira Rubin.
Welcome, everybody, to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. I'm your host, Mira Rubin, and today it is my distinct privilege and pleasure to introduce you to Michael Totten. With over 1,500 presentations and publications, Michael's illustrious 45-year career as an advocate for a solar-powered economy, global biodiversity protection, and climate stabilization has taken his work to a wide range of venues, from Congress to corporations and rock bands to global organizations. He's currently engaged in full-time advocacy for tri-level natural farming using solar microgrids on farms, also called agrivoltaics. Michael is founder and CEO of AssetsForLife.net, which promotes the creation of solutionary collaborative innovation networks through applied digital technologies. Clients include Pearl Jam, Warren Wilson College, Jeremy Rifkin's Third Industrial Revolution Initiative in Europe, World Wildlife Fund's Market Transformation Initiative, Conservation International, Rocky Mountain Institute, Green Sports Alliance, and others. Wow. Michael, so good to have you with us today. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Mira. It's great to be here.
Mm-hmm. So you have quite the history. Really. So I have to get the rock star thing out of the way. How in the world did you get involved with Pearl Jam?
Well, I've been their climate science and solutions advisor for 20 years now, and it started when I was working with Conservation International. And each band member has a different interest, like Eddie Vedder's is surfing, but Stone Gossard's is climate and biodiversity. And so he engaged Conservation International to look at the band's climate emissions for during their annual tour. And they were the first band in the world to actually look at not only their own emissions, but all the fans coming to and from the arena. And then they had me not only calculate that, but then help them identify ways to reduce their footprint, shift to renewables where they could, and then what they couldn't do through efficiency and renewables, they looked at offsetting through a independently verifiable way. So this year, they're doing the most amazing thing. They're the first entity in the world to self-impose a tax of $200 per ton, which is probably going to give rise to close to $1 million that they are then donating or investing in solutions to climate change, which includes, for example, protecting the Kayapo indigenous nation in Amazon, whose lands are being invaded by illegal miners and loggers. So it's an impressive group to work with.
Wow. Wow, that's remarkable. And I would imagine that very few people are aware that initiatives like that exist.
It is amazing. Yeah, you're right.
Do they promote the fact that they're doing that?
They do. They actually have tens of millions of fans, and they let their fans know. In fact, this year they're trying to engage their fans in taking bigger commitments rather than just understanding the problem, actually engaging. And so part of what they're sharing is to show what other people can do as well, and encouraging. Like they called up the Dixie Chicks, or the Chicks as they're now called, and I did their calculation and helped them do the same thing. Coldplay is another one that we did early on, and they've been very aggressive about taking action. So it's starting to permeate, but their emphasis is every institution, public and private, should be doing this.
I would love to see that campaign. That there's so much potential there, to maybe even do a a music festival around that.
Yeah. Well, when Obama first ran for office, right before that, I thought we were going to do something like that because one of their fans owns a whole chain of radio stations and wanted to do public programming around this. And then, of course, when Obama ran, all the bands went on tour promoting Obama. So that kind of fell by the wayside. But I think you're absolutely right. It
It
really
might
needs,
be a perfect time to reinvest
oh,
in
yeah,
that initiative.
that's true.
A really perfect time.
Mhm.
That could make a big difference
I
right
think
now.
you're right. Yeah, oh, absolutely.
What fun. So do you get backstage for all the concerts?
I do. They're very kind to me, and it's amazing if people haven't been to a Pro Jam concert. It spans all the spectrum of all ages, and people stand and sing along with the songs almost the entire concert. It's quite
Oh,
an experience.
it sounds transporting.
Yeah,
Well, so let's get to the technicalities. You mentioned that what you help them do is monitor their footprint. And
right.
it sounds like a pretty complex task, which gets to the heart of what you're really up to is using digital technology um, to identify issues and analyze, I imagine, too. And with the rise of AI, I'm curious as to what the role of that might be in the work that you do.
Yeah, well, it's been a anchor or a mainstay for 45 years of professional work. I basically was in Berkeley when the internet went public and realized, whoa, what a tool. And up until that point, all software was proprietary. And I was involved in trying to stop nuclear power plants and coal plants and promote solar and efficiency. And I realized what a tool because it's public access. It could help collaborate or organize individuals taking action. So I went to Washington, and after finding out that we heavily subsidize the fossil industry, in fact, for 45 years now, we've continued worldwide to pour subsidies that now the International Monetary Fund estimates is about $7 trillion a year.
Well,
So it is there's no wonder that it's inhibited for so long, efficiency, solar and wind. So I saw these digital tools. I went to Congress to try, or I went to the nonprofit sector in Washington. And I said, look, here's a tool that can help you organize locally and state level. Nobody had heard of it. Everybody thought I was absolutely crazy. Uh,
wow.
it
So
took
it's hard to imagine. Right? It's like another world entirely.
That's right, because there was no World Wide Web. There were no browsers. It was you
Wow.
basically used arcane code to send messages. But I found one person who really understood it, and that was a Republican Congresswoman, Claudine Schneider from Rhode Island. And we were kind of like sympathetic souls. She had a radio TV show in Rhode Island, consumer interest, and had stopped a nuclear power plant that was secretively being planned for Rhode Island, ran for Congress. But she understood this organizing concept. So I said, well, one of the things we could do is set up a internet collaboration among the utility commissioners, who are the ones that incent how utilities invest. And been a mainstay for my life is that the energy investments that we make, which are so heavily skewed towards fossil, is going to spend $100 trillion over the next 3 to 4 decades building out, expanding, upgrading, and maintaining the world energy system. And the question is, where is that money being invested? Right now, it's been driven by Wall Street hedge funds, which get good returns, guaranteed returns from utilities. And so that's where all the money goes. Well, now we have the opportunity to use pension funds and also to just reroute those incentives to the more competitive options. And that's where the farming comes in because farming communities are in debt. They're basically, the family farm is disappearing into corporate concentration. And with that concentration, we are seeing the reinforcing of the industrial chemical type of agriculture that has been historically one of the most damaging systems, destroying both the soil. In fact, two profound numbers. It's been estimated that the damage caused by the agriculture system, and we're talking from the planting to the eating and the waste thereafter, so everything in between, all the contamination, the pollution, but also the processed foods that result in health costs, is about $125 trillion. And in that process, the other number is that we have basically plowed up and allowed the erosion of 120 billion tons of carbon. So that's close to 500 billion tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So when you look at those numbers and you look at the energy, the concept of the tri-level farm is to integrate our food and energy nexus, so that we get some symbiosis between the re-nurturing of the soil, because the microbiome in the soils have historically, and still do in all natural environments, they do the irrigation, the fertilization, the mineralization through the root systems. And what you need in order to make a very healthy, high performance soil is that you need to make sure your ground cover is completely covered year round, no bare soils, and that maximizes photosynthetic activity, which is what
with diverse selection of crops.
with diverse selections. So instead of the monoculture, which is extremely destructive, instead you have at least 8 different plant families, which bring all these different functions together, along with scores of species. And in fact, if you look at indigenous agriculture, they had hundreds and hundreds of species and dozens of plant families, which were providing food, fiber, feed, livestock, very healthy, nutritious food for the livestock. So you have that's the under the ground and on the ground systems that can be highly productive, drawing back down that carbon that we lost. And then above the ground, we can install now a different kind of plant, a power plant. I actually call it a photon power harvester, because you're using the same concept. It's not photosynthesis, but it's photovoltaic, but you're basically creating another type of plant that allows the light to come through, so your plant productivity remains the same. And in fact, in today's climate weirdness, we're seeing flash droughts and hail, heavy hail, harsh rains, super long droughts and heat waves. So it becomes a weather buffer. And we're actually seeing, particularly west of the Mississippi, farmers are finding it to be extraordinary for protecting their livestock from premature death because of heat waves, but also for farm workers, and also for the crops not wilting. So you mentioned at the outset the digital tools that I've kind of been involved, and I developed the first apps, not me, but my team of young, talented, fresh out of college, super programmers. We developed the first solar apps for designing solar installations, the first carbon apps for calculating your footprint, the first green building apps to how to build a zero emissions building for architects. And so that has continued to evolve. So today, all those apps have become much more powerful, much simpler to use, open source, so that now we could literally talk about walking through a community and having an inventory of all the ways that we could invest locally to move to a zero emissions, zero pollution local economy. One of the things about urban built environment today is that we didn't think about this, so it's not really designed ideally. We don't have our rooftops in the proper location. So That's where I got the idea of starting to look at the peri-urban farms that serve the community and how they could basically be the providers of the local power system while they're also helping to develop new streams of income for their farms. That led me to, in fact, ProGem has donated $50,000 to help launch this whole concept, working with Warren Wilson College, which is one of the nation's foremost experiential work colleges. It's about 20 miles from Asheville, North Carolina, here in Western North Carolina. So I've been working with them to establish a research and demonstration station so that we can show the farmers here what crops produce as good or better under these panels while creating a new source of income.
So I'm hearing your initiative as two-pronged. One is the development of the apps
Yeah,
and tracking and identifying opportunities and seeing the way they produce. Is that accurate?
that is, and there were a couple of formative dates that makes this now even more timely. The first was the actual example of what's called a collaborative innovation network, or a COIN. And the Wikipedia is the premier example. It's all volunteer people. In fact, the definition of a COIN is a self-organized group of self-motivated individuals who come together, even though they're geographically dispersed, around a mission. And in this case, it was to create the world's largest open source encyclopedia. There's now 54 million people who have been involved in adding material, editing material, or translating it into over 200 languages.
In Wikipedia.
Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And if you were to put it in terms of an Encyclopedia Britannica, it'd be the equivalent of 20,000 volumes of information available. So that was
let me ask you, with Coin, how do you anticipate building awareness, building the audience?
Well, that's the second key date. That was 2001. And to give you one factoid, within the first 10 years, they only had 6 employees.
Wikipedia.
Yeah, but they had over 100,000 volunteers. IBM calculated that if you the amount of time to create that was 100 million hours, which seems enormous until you realize that Americans spend 150 million hours on Facebook every day, and that the amount of television advertising we watch every weekend is equivalent to 100 million hours. So that raised the point that we could create a lot more of these coins with people's, quote, cognitive surplus, the free time they have. So in 2007 is the other key date, which was the iPhone and the smartphone. That put in the pockets of individuals a supercomputer, and the internet connected them to other supercomputers. So you now have the capability to organize around the world. 2/3 of all people now have access to a smartphone. And my argument is that all of the thing we lack is the understanding of using this tool for social good rather than spending it on pornography, online gambling, spewing hatred, all the things that you can do with this tool as well. But it's a phenomenal transformational organizer.
Well, that begs the question that we are inundated with opportunities, information, options. And so galvanizing people to engage, it is ironically, in many ways, much harder than in the past.
Yes.
We have more tools, but we have more access. So it's giving us more choices and more distractions. And I think in many ways it's harder to get people to focus on a cause.
You're absolutely right. And back in 1975, I started a PhD program at Stanford. Didn't last because I realized I was more of an advocate than an academic. But my proposed thesis was to put an apple in every yard. Apple computer. And the idea was each child comes into kindergarten and has a little garden space and continues to grow that garden as a biological textbook throughout their educational life, so that by the time they graduate, they have a recreation or a hobby, but they also have a skill that could become lifelong.
Are you talking about literal gardening?
Yes. So the idea is that it was a cooperative learning process where students look to each other and say, well, why did you get more results than I did? And it becomes a learning process. It's an experiential learning process. Half of all science teachers garden, over half of all families garden. So there you have an opportunity to focus on learning all your STEM, your science, technology, math
Through
through
gardening.
experiential, and you give them the tools that are ultimately successful. They will always end up growing something. So it's actually a very positive nurturing process rather than the assembly model of education that we've had over the last century, which was to stamp approval of kids that they were able to digest and spew out facts.
Right.
Factoids are not learning. So,
Right.
so that remained with me.
So the Apple computer, as part of this, is to be able to analyze and share data and results.
Exactly. And now we have programs and apps where you're able to place plants and see how those different plant families and species grow out, what they look like, and their productive functions. So it actually was part of the work that I did with Jeremy Rifkin in Europe, where the Europeans realized that with artificial intelligence and what I call I've coined an acronym called BRAIN, which is a mnemonic to realize these disruptive technologies that are emerging: biosynthetics, robotics, artificial intelligence, informatics or big data, and nanotechnology. Each one of those is accelerating exponentially in commercialization, but they're also converging and merging. So I think they can be used. Obviously, they are being used by the military. So we know that it's got a dark side, but the bright side of those, if we can harness them, is to look at how we can envision and go from envisioning and understanding to actual investment and implementation, and then continuous operation. And I spent a year at Google working on this concept, where the idea there was to visualize these communities where we could solarize them with microgrids, and how Google bought a company called SketchUp that actually was able to do that. So then I talked to SketchUp about, well, could you do farms with either solar or wind? And they said,
SketchUp is
absolutely.
a 3D modeling program.
3D modeling. And the beauty of it is that they can go from that visualization. So you could bring in farmers, local officials, environmentalists, consumers, and show them as a community participatory event how this would provide economic value for your community. So you can go through the economics, then you can go through the job creation, then you can go through how you would finance this, and then you can hand it off to an architect engineering firm who literally can specify and construct with the tool. Then you hand it off to the facility managers who operate it, and it tells you if it's performing in its design space throughout the entire operation. It's a seamless. And this is the tool that we are proposing to develop at Warren Wilson, so that we can go with an iPad out to a farmer and say, well, you want to see what this would look like on your farm? You want to see what the economics? You want to see how you finance it? And then you want to see what plants. And what we're working towards is there will be sensors which we can draw off big data into an algorithm that tells you how the crops are actually performing, or the orchard or the pasture grasses, as well as the microgrid. So this is a revolutionary opportunity to move $100 trillion from large industrial energy systems to farm-based systems that get you the benefits and the values that tie in a positive symbiosis with farming.
So you are such a big picture guy, and it's a beautiful, beautiful vision. And my mind's going in a bunch of different directions right now. First, I want to put a pin in the second aspect of what you are up to right now, besides the big vision with the applications, is actually creating a proof case at the college, and showing the implementation in the farming community itself. So I want to put a pin in that because we've got so much else now to talk about. When you have this big vision, what I'm hearing is that there's a policy aspect of this, that where policy needs to be developed to support it. You talked about education, and right now, in so many ways, our educational system is being dismantled. So
Yes.
um, there's a lot that has to happen in order to be implementing something like this. What's your vision for that? Do you have a strategy, or are you talking to people that are the strategists?
Yes, that's a complex question, but let me try and be as simple. I have gone through the accreditation system of education. I had a, a full scholarship to Yale for leadership, which because I was a leader in everything in high school. And when I got to Yale, I decided, oh, I don't want to be a leader, I want to be a learner. And but I went through the accreditation, got my degree, started graduate school three different times. Once at Yale Divinity School because I wanted to study morals and ethics, but I left that. Then
That's heartening, by the way. Thank you for that. To have all to have all these visions informed by morals and ethics. That's not as common as we would like to think.
It certainly isn't.
Yeah.
Then I got a teaching credential, and I actually taught high school and started what was we called a school within a school, which another teacher and I had the students interview experts. We got them taught how to use the cable TV video equipment. We brought in experts that talked about solar hot water systems, biointensive garden systems, beekeeping, and they then put that on the local TV. So they learned and shared their learning with the community. And that's what made me decide to go for a PhD in this whole innovative education concept, Apple in every yard. So I started at Stanford, but I realized at this point I was lost to an advocacy world. But I realized in going for all those accreditations that really you were buying into an institutional design that was heavily constrained and really put you in tight limits of what you could entertain before you became an outlier. So I've always moved towards the concept we should be a system of certification. If I can be an autodidact, self-teaching and self-learning and reaching out and reading the books and listening to the experts, I ought to be able to test and be certified instead of having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt that now so many students face. So that's what I've been promoting. And I think the iPhone moment opened that up big time because, of course, we're seeing things like MOOCs where you can, and we're seeing universities open classes now, MIT, Stanford, you can take their classes free.
For folks that don't know what a MOOC is, could you say what the acronym is for?
Yes, it's a multi open access online classroom. I believe something
Thank you.
that approach. So students all over the world, or any citizen around the world, can use the internet to access these talks. So I work in institutions because I know they're there and you have to work to change them. And that's why I'm working with Warren Wilson. It's a private experiential work college. They have a triad curriculum, which I think every college and high school should have, which is that they have the scholastics in the classroom, but they have the working experience. So these kids graduate in 4 years, they can basically run a farm. I mean, every aspect of it. And then third, community service. You have to outreach. And that's part of why I chose Warren Wilson is that community service. It's a focus of taking this agrivoltaics tri-level farm and sharing it with the community. And so that's one level. The other level is, I think, um, I think the gardening concept can be done without even the schools embracing it. And if you look at the amount of YouTube videos that are available by, for instance, inner city women who are impoverished, but they have a little bit of space and they grow amazing permaculture or polyculture. And it's just so inspiring to look at these. And so that's one of the things is how do you create a wildfire of getting other people aware of these? And I use as the example because I've worked internationally for 20, 30 years, the Barefoot Engineering Women's Association in India. I don't know how many people have heard of it, but these are women who were cracking rocks with simple picks to make pavements in China or India. And they were destined to a life of absolute poverty, no chance of escaping it. And a gentleman, I forget his name, created the Barefoot University. And he brought these women together into a trust circle. And he said, we're going to teach you a simple skill that can help you escape your poverty. And then what they chose was how to assemble solar lanterns that they then marketed and installed in villages. Well, this went wildfire around the world, and you started seeing these barefoot women engineers going out to villages on every continent. It's now become a world phenomena, and that's the type of what we hope will be a viral spiral, as David Bollier calls it. So I have to think, yes, maybe some people say it'll take a miracle, others say it'll take a tipping point, but if we don't try, we won't know if it's
And
possible.
we're pretty close to a tipping point. So who knows?
Yes. Yeah, so
So
many negative ones, but also very positive ones that we can initiate.
exactly. And that's sort of a phenomena that I notice. It seems that the negative has become so much more negative and the positive has become so much more positive.
Yeah.
There's like this greater polarity in a way.
I know. It's I back in 1988, the congresswoman I was working for, Claudine Schneider, heard James Hansen present his testimony in Congress about raising the alert that we are in an era now of the super wicked problem of climate destabilization. So she had me draft the first bill introduced in the House of Representatives called the Global Warming Prevention Act. It was 250 pages, 12 titles, referred to 20 subcommittees, but we ended up getting a third of all the members of the House, including 24 Republicans and Newt Gingrich, of all people, on this legislation. Um, we had the time then, if we had taken the action, because the bill promoted energy efficiency, which would have actually generated multi-trillion dollar savings and earnings because we would have become the world's exporter. We lost that opportunity because instead we exported coal plants and nuclear plants. And China, which was asleep at the wheel then and was until 2005, suddenly came on the scene and is now the world's major supplier of end use efficiency motors and appliances and equipment and solar PV and wind power and batteries and electric vehicles. So we pretty much we were the vanguard 30 years ago, and of course that's the solution space. Meanwhile, we God forbid elect a president that is intent on reversing all the climate actions that we have been doing. So it's a sad commentary. The United States is remains asleep at the wheel. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to speak with you more about the initiative at Warren Wilson. Uh, and what does that look like?
Yeah, they have a 1,200 acre sustainable agriculture and agroforestry initiative. So they're already doing a lot of the work that I mentioned about how do you make a more fertile soil and use more diverse cropping systems. But they have pasture grasses, crops, herbal gardens, orchards, livestock, a whole range of livestock from the sheep and pigs to cattle. So all the students learn how to do that and operate the tractors. They have a blacksmith shop. They do repairs on their own machinery. They have a apothecary store that they take the herbs and spices and prepare them for marketing. They
Mhm.
they birth the animals with the veterinarians, basically grow them, and then either they have shearing sheep or they take the pigs to market. I mean, it's a full operation.
I want
So
to go.
it's pretty amazing. I must say,
How long is the program there?
it's been well, it originated the turn of the 1900s, and it started out as a religious college, and it was technical training at the beginning. So now it's evolved into, the full scholastics. And
So it's a 4-year school?
yes, oh yes, and they
Wow.
offer a master's in climate, which I'll be doing some teaching of the students.
Very
Uh,
exciting.
so the fellow who heads this up is a very visionary but pragmatic individual, Professor David Elam, trained at Yale School of Forestry in agroforestry, and so he understands completely all about the soil mycology, the microbiome. So when we talk to him, I work with a cluster of volunteer professionals called the Critical Services Microgrid Group, and our idea is to get these solar battery powered microgrids at all first responder locations, police, fire, emergency vehicles, so that they can respond to weather disasters. Have them at schools so they can become places where people who are lose their residences can have a temporary location. And so we approached the colleges and we started to work with UNC Asheville, but the um, bureaucracy was so thick that it was like molasses. The nice thing about a private college like Warren Wilson is they're more nimble. And David, in particular, said, well, I've got this farm operation. Why don't we start with that? So the very first, we've developed phases. The idea is to make the school completely independent from the grid by installing solar microgrids and batteries. But we now have the farm completely solar electrified.
Mhm.
And with the donation from Pearl Jam, they were able to purchase 2 electric tractors and replace the diesel, which, diesel tractors cause so much um, chronic illness in farmers. So moving to electric is actually a great health advantage, not to mention economic. So the farm is completely now solar microgrid powered, and the next phase is to do all of the rest of the campus. But my part of the innovation that I really, which goes back to the digital, is that people may have heard is now becoming much more talked about, a digital twin. Digital twin has been around for 50 years, pioneered by NASA, where they had to have a virtual visualization of their satellites. So think of that as the physical asset. Then companies started realizing, well, we could use this as a design tool. So auto factories started making all their cars with digital twins, and they can then take that to the manufacturing process. Then they realized, well, we can, like the California uh, college system, community college system, which has 100 campuses and some 5,000 buildings with tens of thousands of rooms and hundreds of thousands of inventory equipment in those rooms, realized they could use it for not only providing all of the information to the financial officer but to the facility managers, to the architects. I mean, it becomes a seamless tool to visualize the whole process very quickly. So we want to develop a digital twin for the farmers, and that's the idea, is that we can, for the farmers who can't come on site, it can be online or on the tablet, and we can. I mean, I would literally like to give an iPad to a farmer and say, "Here's the complete here's how you start it, here's how you build it, here's how you run it, and money in the bank.
Michael, let me ask you a couple questions. One is these apps, you said you've developed apps that cover such a broad gamut of application, and you said they're open source. How do people find these apps?
Yeah, that's where you have to be kind of a self-learner. You just have to Google.
What would you Google?
Well, the ones I developed in the 90s, they've been superseded. There is such a fast iteration. The ones about solar microgrids, they can look at the National Renewable Energy Lab has apps that will allow you to calculate as a farmer the size of the system and the economics of the system. So that would be the place to look, nrel.gov. But there's so many now that are both open source but also proprietary. Like if you're in the microgrid business, there's professional tools that obviously make more sense to use. But the digital twin is concept. It's not in an app form yet. That's what we hope to do.
So let me ask you, with this conceived digital twin, could you actually run hypotheticals?
Oh yeah, scenarios, backcasting. So what I've in my presentations, I talk about what would it look like in Western North Carolina, or the state of North Carolina, or the Southeast region, or the U.S., or other countries, or the whole. And there's already a professor at Stanford who's done most of the data collection on this, as well as NREL has. So NREL has done every rooftop possible in the country.
Did you say what is that organization? NRA?
NREL, National Renewable Energy Laboratory. It's one of the national laboratories that handles all the renewables. But Mark Jacobson, who teaches a course at Stanford, you can go just Google Mark Jacobson. He has an open access textbook that he wrote about how we can move to a zero emissions, largely, overwhelmingly solar and wind based with energy storage and batteries, and all moving to out of combustion in nearly all end uses in all sectors with electrification. There's few items like big planes, big ships, some industrial operations that need can't use electrification, but everything else is economically superior than
They can use hydrogen.
hydrogen is not cost effective against electrification, although you can.
Hydrogen electrification.
Well, yes, if you have excess solar and wind, you can create hydrogen with that, but that's the only green method. But for end uses, yes, to create like steel, you can create green steel with hydrogen from solar electrification. But Michael Barnard, who writes a column at Clean Tech, has looked at the hydrogen economy and found that while there is some real good markets, it's going to be pretty constrained relative to electrification.
I think that's a whole other conversation. I think there are debates, there are
yes,
conflicting opinions about that.
Yes. Well, Michael Barnard is very persuasive. I would recommend you talk with Michael Barnard. Any event, that data is available, so we can show at the module. I mean, part of the tri-level farming concept is that it's modular. So it could be in a backyard, it could be on a quarter acre, it could be on a South Dakota 1,000-acre grain farm. So for you, when you think that there's 500 million farmers worldwide, 80 to 90% of those are small scale farmers. So they need a small modular system.
What are we looking at in terms of cost for implementation?
Well, there's two facets. There's the upfront capital cost, which is the killer for most people who don't have money. And then there's the life cycle cost, which when you levelize that, turns out to be both money saving and earnings increased. So it's overcoming that first capital hurdle. And that's why we're looking very strongly at the financing aspect. Again, using Warren Wilson as example, since they're a cash-strapped college, they don't have the reserves to just invest in this. So fortunately, when you work it out on a life cycle basis, it's cost effective over the current option, whether it's using wood burning even in developing countries or propane, which is
Well,
very.
I think the other legitimate consideration is that solar actually is extractive.
It's extractive, and let's put that in context. Right now, we're already in an extractive system, fossil fuels. Fossil fuels require extracting annually. The solar requires extracting once, then you can. Right now, we're in the process of learning how to recycle or circular economize more and more of the components that go into the solar system. Most of it is recyclable, like all of the steel that goes into the post and a lot of the glass and the framing. Those are recyclables.
The things like lithium and
So some of the rare earth metals,
yeah,
yes. And so the actual footprint of those mining operations turned out to be 2 orders of magnitude smaller than the current footprint of the fossil fuel industry. Now, that's not to diminish the fact that the mining industry has been one
thank
of the
you.
most reckless and damaging and
Thank you.
constantly cumulatively polluting. My wife, who had her own nonprofit stopping subsidies to the mining industry, has spent 40 years in her organization trying to upgrade the 1879 mining law, which basically allowed the mining companies to use cyanide and other ungodly forms to get the metals out and then leave the contamination for the taxpayers. And she was trying to stop that. So it's not
I
easy.
understand there's a big push to be doing deep sea mining too,
Oh,
which
God.
the
That
implications of that are just devastating.
Yeah, the deep sea mining is unnecessary for a solarized wind and battery world and electric world. That is absolutely unnecessary. But it's still, if you keep it to terrestrial, land-based, we still see a lot of these deposits are places of indigenous people or
Exactly.
in biodiversity rich areas. So we have to have, obviously, uh, norms, standards, rules, and regulations and laws. And it's not just a problem for energy. I mean, as you know,
I think solar as we know it is a stepping stone, that it's not a long-term solution because of it is extractive, and that we are still in the process of developing new technologies, hopefully that will harness the energy all around us rather than using something that's extractive ultimately.
well, I'm not sure what you're thinking of, but the one that I've been pushing for 50 years is Amory Levin's radical integrated design for energy efficiency.
Mm.
And if you have not seen any of his presentations, they are mind-boggling because he walks through buildings and vehicles and factories and server farms, which is now the latest talk about how they use so much. And he shows how you can get an order of magnitude improvement through better design. He said,
Beautiful.
and so 2/3 of all the world's energy services could be delivered by radical integrated design of energy efficiency. And what that does is severalfold. First of all, it makes the most secure energy services because they're embedded where you're at. So if the pipelines or the grid go down, you can coast through the coldest or the hottest summers in your house, remaining nice and comfortable. Um, so he shows that you would precipitously drop the amount of minerals and other resources required so that by the time you get around to looking at, well, what kind of supply do you want? You're not going to have the extractive issues. You can be highly selective where you have your lithium mines or where you
I
uh,
just think we're going to make that need for them obsolete. That's
all
maybe
supply,
high in
all
the
supply.
sky, but
Well, I think for nearly all supply, you can radically reduce it. We
Yeah.
live, but the estimate from Oxford most recently is it yes, for the next 30 years, going to solar, wind, batteries, and electrolyzers for hydrogen, we can see some $12 trillion of savings. If you add in the externalities, which right now are well over $10 trillion a year, the economic damages caused by emissions, then you're looking at ultimately accumulating several tens of trillions of dollars a year.
I also think that the dollar only metric is really it's something that we need to move away from too. So, which brings me back to policy
Yeah,
conversation, because what you're talking about is microgrids, and the utilities are very deeply entrenched and powerful organizations
that's right.
that will be directly threatened by the evolution of these microgrids. And yet, with climate destabilization, microgrids become more and more essential.
Yes. So two good stories to counter the horrible practices of what are mainly the investor-owned utilities who get a guaranteed 12% return on investment, better than we get in our own portfolios for most people if they have a portfolio. They're guaranteed that. Whereas if you look at what the Department of Defense concluded, they did an analysis of the 21st century, the threats that they have to plan for, the cyber crime, the cyber terrorism, the physical wartime attacks, and now a whole host of climate-triggered weather disasters. They decreed that all their installations and bases so transition to microgrids that are distributed, on-site powered, and are islandable. That is to say, they can be full operation even when the grid and pipelines collapse. Now, the rural electric co-ops got the message. So these are member-owned, consumer-owned cooperatives, and they own half the distribution lines in the country. And so they have embraced this decree as a civilian step, and they've given their own name to it. They call it the Agile Fractal Grid. So every farm, every rural community is a fractal part, fractal being self-similar, so it's like repeating or replicating, and that can stand alone in operation if need be in a disaster, but can also link together to the distribution lines to form a large aggregate macro grid. And they're looking now at using things like blockchain so that as a farm generates more power than they need, they can do peer-to-peer exchange trading with their peers so that the blockchain can automatically meter the money that they earn from that. And
Is
in
this
fact,
currently implemented?
yeah, it's not on the grand scale. But here in North Carolina, two of the co-ops have installed microgrids on farms, and so that's what we're looking is to reach out to the microgrids. We've got ProJam involved because one of the interesting things is there's all this talk about building a lot more transmission lines so that the investor-owned utilities can move power from their big central solar, wind, or fossil nuclear to across states. Well, they get a higher rate of return for that huge capital investment than something that is uh, very inexpensive, and that's what's called reconductoring. There are conductors on all of the transmission and distribution lines that help maintain the capacity of power as it flows through. When it gets hot, the lines sag. The amount of carrying capacity goes down. In fact, they sag so much they create the wildfires that we're seeing in California that's bankrupting PG&E. So there's a company called TS Conductor, which has an ultra efficient, Amory Lovins promotes this. He's in fact their chief science advisor, that you can reconductor all the existing transmission and distribution lines, which would triple the amount of solar and wind you can bring on these lines, and it would reduce the sagging, so it would reduce the wildfires. Well, for the National Rural Electric Co-ops, that is a beautiful thing because it minimizes their costs. The investor-owned utilities don't want it because they don't make that much money off of it. So we're ProGem is actually thinking of doing a promotional campaign around this, working with the rural electric co-ops, particularly in the Northwest area where the band's located. It has all these renewables on Indian lands who are interested in making some money from those wind and solar farms. And this will allow that to go from Montana and the Dakotas to Oregon and Washington. So that's a positive thing, I think.
Yeah. And I see policy shifts have to occur to be able to support the microgrids for most communities,
Right, and that's happening and that'll have to happen at the county and city level.
Right.
Now, in my state, the state legislature prohibits the cities and counties from taking this type of action. So that's very retro.
That stuff has to change.
Yeah, but who heads up the Energy Committee in the legislature? A former Duke utility executive. So
Right.
see this crony capitalism going on. But in Boulder, one of the Walton family members, Lucas Walton, donated $100,000 to Jack's Farm, which is one of the most prominent solar microgrids or agrivoltaics. That family farm couldn't make cash flow with their grains that they were growing. So they basically looked at putting up agrivoltaics, which has become a community event center, brings kids out for education, has singing music events, has a CSA farm. People come and get crops. So they found that the county codes inhibited and really slowed down the process of installing one of these. So the Lucas Walton's grant helped them to improve the county code systems so that if you look at a country like Germany, which has streamlined this, they have one form that you fill out online, takes an hour, approved. They have half the installation cost than the US because of our antiquated code system. So that's going to happen at the county and city level. I do think, though, that as has been said, the states are the crucible of innovation, and the counties and cities will now be the crucibles of innovation. And the way that I look at it is that cities are going to become mini grids, and they will connect neighborhoods, which are microgrids, and each individual house becomes a nanogrid when you think of all electrification. And then your electric car becomes a nanogrid that is detachable, portable, interoperable. So we now have cities that will link to other cities into a macro grid. And that makes so much eminent sense. And it can happen now at a differential rate. Some will be leaders, others will be laggers. Those that are laggers will face disasters and they'll look for innovations, and all they have to do is look at the leaders. And so my other hope is that these collaborative innovation networks will take hold in promoting the best in play policies and practices.
Well, Michael, how can people get involved in this work? How can they support what you're up to?
That's a good question, because right now I'm still in the development of the Warren Wilson digital twin. So I don't really promote anything else, but there is so much information. There is
do you need more developers? Right? Like what?
Well, right, for the project, we have to come up with we have the whole microgrid is financeable. That's already taken care of. But for the digital twin and the faculty and the administrative and the facility manager cost over a 5 to 10 year period is going to require probably over a 10-year period, $10 million. So I'm helping them in the process of raising those funds. And the idea is that the campus will become not just an on-site center show and tell or a community service outreach by the students and faculty, but that digital twin will be an open access tool that any college anywhere in the world could implement and work with their farmers locally. And the idea then is that that becomes the growing out of the coin, the collaborative
So they
innovation.
would be able to customize it for their
Totally.
specific.
Microclimate, local microclimate. There's already a database of 20,000 edible plants and plant functional families. So that we're going to start seeing all these data sets that can be incorporated on this ecosystem of apps that makes up the digital twin. It's very exciting.
It is really exciting. So, Michael, how can people be in touch with you?
You can just you can see my name in the lower corner, Michael P. Totten. I put the P in there because there's another Michael Totten, Michael J. Totten, who is a war correspondent. And we keep getting each other's mail. So all you have to do is Google Michael P. Totten and or email me at totten.michael@gmail.com. And I'm putting together a list of outstanding video presentations that I think is the first order of business is get yourself a fully understanding of this. And there are brilliant people who are like Christine Jones, Australian soil scientist, ungodly mind.
You turned me on to Christine Jones, and we're going to be featuring her, one of her videos on our movie night, and I'm going to see if I can interview her as
Fantastic.
well.
She is extraordinary. And then on the agrivoltaics, the National Renewable Energy Lab, nrel.gov, has a whole program called Inspire. You can just Google NREL Inspire. And that is over 20 research institutions in the country are doing agrivoltaic research for their state or location or region. And that they have the apps and they have the documentation and they have a network of professionals who are doing this. So that would be probably the best if people want to stay on the insights of what's developing.
Wonderful. And how about any books that you might recommend people check out?
Yeah. Well, Mark Jacobson at Stanford, as I mentioned, and you can download this free, even though it's also sold by Cambridge University Press, is the book on basically it says we don't need any new innovations or new inventions to get to a 100% emission pollution free, secure, renewable energy system. And that's such details that it's a semester or 2 semester course he gives. But that would be from the energy side. And then from the soil side, I have a PowerPoint that lists a lot of the books. And if they again go to Michael P. Totten, they'll see that I've posted the PowerPoint presentation. They can
This
grab.
is michaelptotten.com.
No, it's I put it up at different sites like research.
Michael, maybe you can share the links with me and we can post them
Okay.
when we post
That's
the
here.
podcast.
Okay.
That would be great.
Yeah.
And so, is there anything I should have asked you that I didn't ask?
Oh, no, you covered, and I kind of talked too much. I should have let you ask more questions. It probably would have fleshed
You
out.
didn't talk too much. You gave us great information.
Well, thank you, Mira. I love the discussion, and
Likewise. Thank you so much for being with us.
thank
And
you.
thank you to everyone who's listening. We invite you to like, follow, and share. And I also want to thank all of our Patreon sponsors who support us, and we invite you to join them. And the links will be available under this video. And I also want to thank my partner in crime here at Sustainability Now, Scott Billy, who is also our producer. And that's it for today. So until next time, live your best life, love the world around you, and together we can save the world.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now. Visit sustainabilitynow.global to find resources related to today's program. While you're there, pledge your support by making a contribution to help us shape a world that works. And remember to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.